Okay, so our goal here is to recreate a version of the Flappy Bird game where the player uses the spacebar to make the bird move up. Gravity automatically makes it drop. Any collisions with either the pipes or the ground will automatically reset the game and reset the score. Player earns score points by navigating through each set of pipes, through the gaps in the pipes, and any score is lost also when the game resets due to a collision. So that's our basic goal. So taking a look at our planning documentation, our problem description is sitting there. It's just a simple description of what we're looking to do. We navigate the bird through the pipes by pressing the spacebar to keep it in the air. We score a point by going through each set of pipes, and the game finishes or reloads, just resets and restarts, and the score lost if there's any collision with the pipe or the ground. The design of the application is quite simple. It relies on one single event listener, which is a key down event for the spacebar to keep the bird in the air. Gravity automatically has it dropping towards the ground, which is just a variable that we'll use. The move up function is the one that responds to the key down event. And then our draw function. So whilst we're using the game loop set up in a fashion where we're using a draw function and the request animation frame method to continuously draw that, call that function, all of the work will be done in the draw function. And the pseudocode for that function, the plan that we're trying to achieve, is to firstly draw the background image. So we're drawing the layers in the order that they need to be drawn in, and then we want to draw the pipes. But I think the best way to deal with the pipes is to work with them in an array. So an array will consist of both a north pipe and a south pipe. So each element of the array will have two pipes, one drawn for the top and one drawn for the bottom, which I'm calling the south pipe, with a consistent gap between them. So we use some variables to try and control that gap. And then we want to move that pipe element, which is the combination of the north and south, to the left so that they move together. And then when they reach a certain point over towards the left, which I'm thinking maybe about 100 pixels, we can adjust that. That's when we'll want to add a new pipe to the array. So it's possible to have multiple pipe sets on screen at once, which we'll do by setting the x coordinate of the pipe array to canvas.width. So it will actually appear as though it starts from off the canvas and move to the left. And we'll use a random y value so that we can create this variation between where the gap appears, so how high the north and south pipes are. So what we're going to try and do. And then we're going to have another if statement that says that if there's collisions between the bird and the pipe or the bird and the ground, then we want to just restart the game. And then our other if statement will be that if our pipe x value gets to less than around about 5, again that's a variable we can play around with, then we want to add 1 to the score. So that would be an indicator that the bird has made it through a pipe set, and that's how we'll add a score, and we'll deal with it that way. That's a setting that we might have to play around with a little bit. And then after our for loop, which will loop through the array, we're then going to draw the ground, which will be the next thing we need to draw, and draw the bird on top as the final thing to draw, and then the score at the bottom. And then our request animation frame to repeat the whole process is the plan for that draw function at this point in time. We'll see how that goes. So as we look at starting to write the code for this project, you'll need to take the usual setup steps. We're in the HTML setting up the canvas, and then in our JavaScript using our variables to declare the canvas and set the context. You'll need to have some variables to load all of the images that you'll need. Those being the background, the bird, the foreground image for the floor, and also the north and the south pipes. And then we're also going to have some audio. There's some audio in the files that you're given for this project. You need to load those audio files, but you can probably wait until you get everything else to work and do the audio last, because it's relatively easy to do. And then in the draw function, you can draw those images, drawing them in the correct order with the background first. and at least get things appearing on the screen as a first step before you then look to move on and start to code the draw function properly according to the pseudocode that we had a look at just earlier. So that will be the next step where we start to look at coding our draw function correctly. But just before we get to that draw function, the game is going to require some global variables. So having a look at some of the things that we're going to need, because we want to maintain this consistent gap here between the pipes, the north and the south pipes, we're going to need to use a variable to keep that consistent. You can probably play around with that variable, but if you start at about 85, that's probably a good starting point, given that the height of the bird there is 50 pixels, I believe. 85 probably allows a decent gap for it to get through, but you can work with that. We need to work with this constant. So the way of maintaining that gap will be to use a variable called constant, for want of a better name, which is really the height of the north pipe plus our gap. Now, and which we can play around with, our gap being 85 at the moment, but we can play around with that based on what you think looks about right as the game progresses. But that constant variable is going to be quite important. We obviously see there you've got the height of the canvas, and then also the height of the canvas minus the foreground image, which will be an important part of our application as well. We don't need necessarily variables for that, but we're going to use that. We are going to need to set an x coordinate for the bird. So we're going to use, rather than use an object here, we'll just use a bx for the x coordinate of the bird, set some starting values, bx and by, to set the start position of our bird at say 10, 150. Again, you can play around with those to get it starting at a point that you're happy with. And then our gravity. So we're going to need to have our bird falling automatically, and our key press event moving it up a little bit. But our falling gravity value, we can play around with this as well. You set it at 1 and then sort of figure out what seems to work by changing that. And you can use decimal values as well. You don't necessarily have to use whole numbers there. But that's going to allow us to set up the variables that we need for this application. Okay, so as we look to start to create the draw function then, the first thing that we'll need to do is to draw the background image, which will be just starting at 0, 0 point of the canvas, the origin point of the canvas, and that should allow our background image to at least appear on the canvas before we look to then put the other images on top of that. So we've got to remember that we have to create these images, draw these images on the canvas in order, with the background image being first. Then we can draw the pipe images in, the pipe north and the pipe south. For the moment, we can just use any coordinates for X and Y for those pipes. We can draw both of those in, but we've got to remember the pipe south coordinate, the Y coordinate, we need to add in the constant, our variable that we created up above for 85 pixels, so that we get that gap between the north and the south pipes, and that gap remains consistent. So our constant is going to be the height of the pipe, north pipe, plus the amount of the gap. And then we can look to draw our foreground image in, which is the ground at the bottom. It'll cover over the south pipe, and we need to draw that at the height of the canvas minus the height of that foreground image. So that will have its x coordinate sitting at its y coordinate sitting at the right spot, so that it's sitting flush with the bottom of the canvas. And then we can look to draw in our bird, and the x and y values for the bird will come from our bx and by variables that we created just earlier, that you can mess around with to get it in a position that you're happy with. But that will then draw our bird on the canvas along with all of our other images. And then we've got our request animation frame method, recalling the draw function over and over to continue to draw those objects on the canvas. And then finally, we'll have at the bottom there, we'll be able to add the draw function in at the bottom of our code to initiate the first running of our game. and then we should be ready to continue on. But before we do that, we'll need gravity, because we'll need to have our bird automatically dropping. So we're going to use our gravity amount, our gravity variable, and have our y coordinate, our bird on its y coordinate increasing as we drop down. So we're going to be adding gravity, the value of gravity, to our y coordinate so that the bird automatically falls, and then our key press event will subtract from our y when we get there. So our key press event that we'll put inside of a function will decrease the value of y. Right, at this point though, our pipes aren't quite working how we want. We've just got them statically positioned on the screen, so we need to add some code to manage those. And we're going to do that using an array. So up in our global variables area, we're going to add a pipe array, which will be empty initially. But then we want to add the first element, pipe 0, and provide it with an x coordinate so that it's the width of the canvas, so it's actually starting off the screen, and a y0. And then down in our draw code, where the code comment there is, that's our drawing of our background. Underneath that, directly underneath that, we're going to implement a for loop to loop through our array, and we're going to put our draw image method of our pipe north and south inside the array, and use the pipe element for the x coordinate and the y coordinate, and it will draw it in that position for the pipe north. And then for our pipe south, we're going to use the constant. So our y coordinate is going to have the value of the constant added to it. So when we draw that in, we're drawing the pipe south image with the same x coordinate, but the y coordinate with the constant added, so that we get our gap. And then when we move them by subtracting from x, they both move together, because both pipes are a part of the same pipe array element. And we then want to figure out at what point do we want to add a new set of pipes into the array. So we need to play around a little bit. Canvas width minus about 188 seems a reasonable place to start, but we can play around and modify that value. And we want to be adding an element to our pipe array. So if our pipe x reaches the point that we determined to play around with, at the moment canvas width minus 188, then at that point there, when we reach that, we want to add a new element using pipe.push. So pipe.push will add another set of pipes to our array using an x coordinate at the width of the canvas, so that it starts off the canvas and then moves to the left as the first set of pipes did. But our y coordinate this time though, we want that to be different. We actually want that to be random. So we want to randomly choose what our y coordinate is going to be. So using our random functions will give us a value between 0 and 1, and then we want to multiply that. We want to multiply that by the value of the pipe north dot height. So by the height of that pipe, when we multiply that by our randomly chosen value, we will be able to get a y coordinate that we're happy with, but we also want to make sure that we then add on the value of our pipe north dot height. So that pn there, that's standing for pipe north, which is the object, the image object that we've created. So we're going to subtract pipe north at the end there, and that should give us a y coordinate, a random y coordinate, that allows us to position a new set of pipes in an appropriate spot, but with the gap in a different place to the way they were before. So if we just return to our pseudocode for a moment and have a look at where we're at, the next bit that we want to do is to look at our collisions, which is this portion of our pseudocode here. So we've drawn the background and we've started with our for loop, looping through our pipe array and adding a new pipe to the array at our x coordinate and our random y coordinate. And now we want to, still inside the for loop, add another if statement that deals with our collisions and looks for collisions with the bird and the pipes, or the bird and the ground. And then after that we'll have a final if statement that adds our score. So With our collision detection, we're really detecting collisions in a few different spots. Our bird and the pipe can have collisions either here, where bird.x plus bird.x position plus bird.width is colliding with the pipe. We've got which is this condition here. It's less than pipe.x, so that means we've got a collision there. And we've also got possibility of a collision where the bird is here. The bird's x coordinate is greater than or equal to pipe.x plus the pipe.width. And finally, we've also got another and where the bird's y coordinate is less than or equal to the y coordinate of the pipe currently plus its height, which will give us that position there. All three of those will equate to a collision with the pipe. Or we also need to look for the positions at the bottom as well. So these positions where the bird's y coordinate plus the bird's height are less than or equal to the y pipe plus the gap, our constant, sorry, so it's got it in this position down here. Or we've also got to take care of this particular option down at the bottom here where the bird has hit the ground, because that causes a game over as well. Then we need to note the way that that has to be structured. So that's all one condition, but notice the parts where we've got or conditions also in their own set of brackets. So you need to be very careful about the syntax you use to put that if statement together, the condition for that if statement together. But then that should allow us, and what we want to do, the action that we want to perform is pretty simple. We just want a location.reload, which is just going to refresh that screen and reload it, and the bird goes back to its starting position. The score, when we get there, will go back to 0, and the game starts all over again. Now that's really what we want to do. So that should allow us to get that happening. You should be able to then look at the pseudocode for the scoring to get the score happening once you've done that. Done the if statements to deal with the collisions, and also then you might look at adding some other elements to the game like levels and some of those other sorts of things, perhaps even an animated sprite for the bird instead of the one that we have. A whole range of things that you could look to add to this application to make it uniquely your own.